Follow to Equestria. Side story. Gardner. By Vanner. Chapter 2. To all things, a place. Ten Pony Tower is always an interesting place to visit. A self-proclaimed bastion of civilization. They were more than eager to buy my fresh fruits and caseless fine liquors. Despite my generosity to the dead, I felt no remorse in charging these living ponies as much as possible for what I brought. They had snubbed me and my mission for so long that I had nearly given up. When one of the guards inquired about the apple whiskey I drank in frustration, it was then I was given an in. I was nearly kicked out again when they found out my primary profession distasteful. But someone up high had vouched for the idea. I was permitted to continue my trade. As a thank you, I tracked down my mysterious benefactor, a one DJ pony. I at least found his assistant. I gave the gray mare a bushel of fresh apples, a few bottles of whiskey, and my card. When I had first started exploring the office buildings of Manhattan, I had found that many desks held small pieces of paper with details of their former occupants. It was from these that I identified many of the remains. I had taken to the idea for myself. Gotcha designed a press for my cards, a square of steel with my name and trade punched into it. The edges were razor sharp, but covered in rubber for use later. It was a tiny gift to those who were willing to listen to my message. With my trip to Ten Pony Tower complete, I headed back towards the lot. A few run-ins with traders had slowed home progress, and I found myself forced to stop in a small hamlet for the evening. I knew no ponies there, and found myself having to explain why I was hauling bodies of ponies after some overly curious young cult lifted the tarp for my cult. This conversation happened, as it frequently did, at gunpoint. I preached my virtues of the burial and the joys of the new life it would bring. The townspeople seemed to understand, and let me go about my business. My cart, however, would have to wait outside. A mustard cyan coat approached. "Are your undertaking services for hire?" he inquired. "I will happily bury your departed," I replied. I was led to what was a squat concrete building half buried in the hillside. Exceptional only in the fact that it was still whole despite 200 years of neglect. I expected I had originally been completely buried, given the lack of windows and the mountain of dirt on top of it. I was shown inside it and found that ponies had taken up residence among the ruins, making the windowless building their own. Some had set up shops there, others had taken offices as apartments to pry together what trade they could. My inquiries as to the deceased were met with some hostilities until my host informed them that I was no ghoul, but an undertaker paying respect to those gone before. Their attitudes mellowed, and I was shown to the basement. I couldn't have been more angry at the sight if I had been radioactive. Hundreds of skeletons lied stacked in piles in the basement. Rather than burying the dead with the respect they deserved, they had simply shoved the corpses of the old world from their minds into the basement of civilization. Or, in this case, a literal basement. I named my price for the removal. Inflated slightly due to the callous treatment of the dead, the mustard-colored pony agreed and asked when I could clear them out. If I had a few ponies who were willing to haul carts to Gardner's lot, I could take them the next day. The pony agreed, and we shook hoops. The town lay quiet that evening, safe from raiders or bandits for at least the night. Guards took watch over the carriage-built walls of the city, staring out into the waste and looking for trouble. I found myself looking up at the stars through the sporadic clouds. There was no rain to be had, possibly for another month. The upcoming drought did little more to concern me, as the greenhouses kept the orchards moist enough to weather near anything. I dreamed that evening of my friend that I had lost all those years back. On my last visit to his grave, a great apple tree had grown from the wastes, pushing aside the concrete that surrounded it. The tree bloomed with a beauty that had attracted a hamlet to settle under its boughs. The raider's tree hadn't fared as well, but still bore fruit. It proved that no matter what type of pony you were in life, in death, all ponies were equal. When I woke the next morning, the mustard-colored pony brought with him 4 of the sickest and scrawniest ponies I had ever laid eyes on. I had my doubts to their hauling capacity and feared they would become additionals to my cart before the journey was out. I began to move the skeletons from the basement, covering the barrows with a shroud as I marched them through the mezzanine. The ponies of this place ignored me, pretending that I was instead a ghost haunting their lives with sin of the past. It took the entire morning to fill the carts of my pony assistants. One had simply refused to help as he saw the nature of my task, and bolted from the building. The others were apparently made of sterner stuff and began to help me load the remains of the old world into the carts. I hitched the abandoned wagon to my own. The skeletons of the long dead weren't nearly as heavy as the remains of the recently deceased. I had found that hauling a second cart was not nearly as difficult as I had imagined. The subtraction of 1 pony nearly dealt very little. I made ready my exodus when a drunken unicorn approached me, dragging a cornflower unicorn filly by her mane. She had a cutie mark of a red and blue sphere with an orbiting yellow sphere. The young girl cried in pain as the unicorn approached me. His breath reeked of rot gut and turpentine. "You's the one buying the dead ponies," he slurred. "I don't buy bodies," I informed him. "I will return any of your deceased to the earth, if you'd like." "I got a body for you," he spat. "Give me 10 caps and it's yours." He belched horrifyingly, filling the air with a stench of death. "I don't buy bodies," I repeated. "They were once ponies like yourself, and to treat them as commodities, to be sold is disrespectful to their lives." The girl whimpered. He slapped her. "Yeah, then you can take this body," he said, throwing the unicorn filly at me. She trembled to the ground, near tears. "Bitch ain't good for nothing." "My charges are those who have passed from this world," I protested. "Oh, no, dead," he slurred. "Oh, I can fix that." His offer to correct the oversight involved floating a revolver from his saddlebag. He pressed the barrel to the back of the unicorn's head. I swatted the revolver away and landed a poof to the temple of the unicorn. He went down in a heap, partly from impact, partly from his own drunken stupor. I tossed the revolver in my cart and ordered my team forward. The unicorn filly followed me out of town. About 100 years out, I stopped and turned around to ask her. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I asked her. "Please, just take me with you," she begged. I sighed wearily and looked back at the town. The drunken unicorn was standing back up. While I really don't have the time for the living, leaving this filly where to die would be a sin that I could not forgive myself of. The lot may not have an ideal place for a teenage filly, but it was better than the waste where her life and virtue would be forfeit. I told her to walk in the middle of the train, and to run at the first sight of trouble. 3 hours into the walk, and sure enough, 2 of the scrawny ponies had dropped dead on the concrete. Cursing my ill fortune, their carts became hooked to my own. Now hauling 4 carts down the concrete highway, I began to seriously worry about raiders. If hit, I would have to ditch the carts to fight, and there would be possibility I would be too tired to do anything about a serious attack. The filly offered to haul 1 cart, but I found myself refusing her help. "Do you have any place you can go," I asked, "where you're going to be safe? But it is in no way an easy life." "I have nowhere," she said, staring down at the concrete. "Besides, he paid for you to take my body away. You're not dead," I suggested, "and he didn't pay me." "You took his gun, didn't you?" I had to consent the point. I had hoped the filly didn't feel like I owned her. As we approached the final stretch of our journey, the wagon wheel fencing of the lot came into view. The path to the entrance was very clearly marked, and to stay from the risk of barricade of bullets from Gotcho's automatic turrets. When he had installed them, I questioned the wisdom of having a robot capable of raining death without any pony interaction. He noted that paths were clearly marked. He had installed signage in pony, zebra, and whatever crazy language he spoke, as well as a colorful picture warning of the dangers. Once again, I was forced to agree with Gotcho's insanity. The 4th and final pony stumbled to the dirt and died of exhaustion, just as we got to the bottom of the village. With no other options, I hooked the filly up to the final cart. I tossed the emaciate pony into my own. I walked in silence as she grimaced and struggled under the weight of the bones. Strength was obviously not her special talent. The wagon wheel ground to a halt as we passed through the steel doors and into the lot. I unhooked my wagon and stretched out like a cat, too much strain for one day. I could barely wait to get to the table, eat whatever case I had cooked, then go to bed. I stumbled into the showroom to find Kesa cooking happily in her kitchen. Her mane was tousled, and the smile on her face meant that she and Gacha just had a good use of my absence. I wanted to be angry with their bizarre ways, but found myself cracking a smile instead. Their shameless love for each other always brought me happiness. I settled up to the table, and to a plate of fresh-baked apples. "In all the years we've known each other," said Kesa, "have all my lessons in manners and courtesy gone unheeded?" I had no idea what she was talking about. She smiled politely and revised her question more directly. "Are you going to introduce me to this young lady?" she asked. I turned to find the unicorn filly had followed me inside and was standing next to the table. I should have been surprised, but I found myself too tired to care. Kesa, this is... I found myself drawing a blank. Sure, we had walked 8 hours together, but aside from our 2 brief conversations, we hadn't spoken. "My name's Charm," said the unicorn. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Kesa." "Mrs.," corrected Kesa with a smile. "My husband would like to meet you too, I'm sure. Please, let me prepare you a plate. It is so rare to have visitors." "Begging your pardon, I'm no visitor, madame," said Charm. "Sir has been paid to take me away." Kesa's genteel demeanor shifted into unbridled rage, as I attempted to both explain myself and not choke on her gourmet cooking. "What the fuck, Gardner?" demanded Kesa. "You, of all people, buying a slave? Has all your talk of freedom and generosity been lies?" "It's not what happened at all," I coughed. "Charm is no slave. Technically, I was paid to bring her body here, but as you can tell, she's not my typical charge." "Is this true?" she demanded Charm. The unicorn filly shrank from Kesa's playful gaze. "Yes, madam," she replied, biting her lip. "And you are free to leave at any time?" she asked, directing the question not at Charm, but at me. "She followed me here," I said. "She is free to stay or leave as she chooses. I am no more her master than I am yours or Gacho's." Kesa's shoulders relaxed as she breathed a deep sigh of relief. She picked up a plate of baked apples and placed it in front of Clem. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," she said. "Excuse me, I need a moment to compose myself." She walked away from the dining table and back towards her bedroom. Gacho wandered in from the garage. He had asked what I had said to his wife that made her raise her voice. "She thought I bought the young lady," I explained. Gacho then proceeded to remind me where Kesa had come from, and that slavery was an extraordinary touchy subject for her. "Yes, Gacho, we've had this conversation at least a dozen times," I reminded him. "Charm, this is Gacho. Gacho, Charm." Charm respectfully nodded to the half-mechanical pony. Trying desperately not to stare at his wheels, he wandered off towards the bedroom to find his wife. I pushed my plate aside and walked off to our living room. It wasn't much, a few benches in the middle of what used to be a carriage showroom, some bookshelves with whatever books we could find, some tables. The piece of resistance, however, were the windows. What were once sheet glass walls were replaced with stained glass indentations of Celestia calling home her ponies over a field of apple trees. I offered to trade a harvest of apples for the work, but the unicorn who made these windows would accept nothing but my devotion to Equestria as payment. The glassmaker, as the unicorn called himself, often found his way here, and was a welcome guest in our home. Gacho was always happy to see him, and Kesa greeted him as a brother. I strongly suspected they were related in some way, but as it was much of Kesa's past, I didn't bother to pry. I sat exhausted on the bench, glad that I had brought home the bones of so many. It had been a good day's labor, even if I had acquired some unneeded help along the way. I turned to Clem as she finished her plate, then what I had left on mine. Apparently her father, or whoever that pony was, had fed her very little. On the other hand, she was a growing filly, probably just a teenager. She came to the living room and sat at my feet. I figured now was a good time as any to lay down some ground rules. "We are a family here," I said. "We work together, we live together, we pray together. Those are the only rules, and if you want to stay, you need to find something you can do." Clem looked sadly at the floor, as if I had crushed her spirit, or maybe she didn't understand what I was asking. It was possible that I had misinterpreted what she was thinking due to my own fatigue. I showed her to the spare room and made for my own. I half hoped that she left in the middle of the night. My room was sparsely furnished, consisting of a bed, a dressing dummy on which hung my armor, and a mat on which I offered my evening prayers. I sped through my evening rituals with less than my normal pas devotion, attempting to outpace my creeping fatigue. My body shacked, and the sweet form of embrace of my bed filled my tired bones with joy of rest. I had barely fallen asleep when I felt my bed list to one side. I snapped awake to find Clem clawing into my bed, her eyes filled with tears. "What are you doing, young lady?" I asked. "So said I had to find something to do to stay." She wept. She presented her flank to me. "Please be gentle. I'll try not to cry." I rolled out of bed, nearly tripping backwards over myself, trying to escape the girl. No, I protested. "I may have not made myself clear about what I wanted from you, but what you're offering is not it." Her head drooped and tears filled her pillow. "Isn't that why you, sir, brought me here?" She wept. "Isn't that why many ponies take in young fillies in the wasteland?" "You must have me confused with some pony else," I said. "You're here because I paid to take you away. You said that yourself." "Then what am I supposed to do here?" asked Clem. "If that's not how I earn my keep, then what can I do for you?" "You're a unicorn, aren't you?" I asked. "Surely you know spells. Those can be handy. If nothing else, I can teach you in my ways. It's hard work, but..." She looked at me, tears still deep in her violet eyes. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "You never offer yourself to me again. Do you understand?" She nodded sadly. "If you wish to stay, you need to accept our rules. We are family, and families don't fuck each other. Not in the bedroom, not in the waist." A static creaking and pleasured whinnies echoed down the hall. Kesa and Gacho sought out to make me a liar. I pressed my hoof to my face and groaned miserably. "If you come to my room again," I sighed, "I will throw you off the lot. We will offer you all that we have here. If you're willing to work, prostituting yourself is not work. If I made myself absolutely clear." She nodded, biting her lip. "Go back to bed," I ordered. "We rise early, and you have much to learn." Clem rolled off my bed and walked towards the door. She looked back at me. "Good night, sir," she said. "My name's Gardner," I corrected. "Good night, sir," she repeated and closed the door behind her. You were just listening to Vault Equestria, Side Stories, Gardner, Chapter 2, To All Things a Place, by Vanner, as read by The Fat Man. I hope you enjoyed this, and see you next chapter. Goodbye, everybody.